My husband insisted I apologize to his closest female friend because the truth I told hurt her feelings. When I refused, he screamed with rage. Apologize or this marriage is done. I agreed. I went to her home, looked her dead in the eyes, and with her husband right there, I said words that made them both understand why women like me refuse to compromise the truth. Can you imagine being told by your own husband to apologize to his emotional affair partner, or he'd divorce you? My world shattered that day. Mason stood there, arms crossed, delivering that ultimatum like it was a business deal, not the end of our 5-year marriage. He truly believed he was the victim, and I was just being unreasonable. But what he didn't know was that I was about to turn his little game completely on its head. Before we dive deeper into this wild ride, if you believe in standing up for yourself, for honesty, and for the truth no matter how uncomfortable, then please hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it helps us connect with more people who refuse to be silenced. I stared at the man I promised to love forever, and in that moment, I realized I didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe I'd never truly known him at all. The Mason I thought I married would never demand I apologize to his best friend, Scarlett, for the crime of noticing their wildly inappropriate relationship. The Mason I married wouldn't gaslight me, making me think I was the problem, when his emotional affair with Scarlett Pierce had been happening right under my nose for years. You want me to apologize to her? My voice was so calm, so steady, it actually surprised me. For what exactly? His voice rose with each accusation, as if he were the one who'd been wronged. For treating her with suspicion and coldness since the day you met her. For making her feel unwelcome in our lives. For being so jealous that you can't accept I have a meaningful friendship outside our marriage. Then came the kicker. Scarlett's been nothing but kind to you, and you've hurt her feelings with your constant attitude. She deserves an apology, and if you can't give her that, then I don't know if I can stay in this marriage. Something snapped inside me then. Not heartbreak, not yet. That would come later. What I felt was this intense, cold clarity. Sharp as a blade. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when I still believed in the life Mason and I were building together. I'm Arya Montgomery, and for 5 glorious years, I genuinely thought I had a solid marriage. We met at a summer barbecue, one of those perfect July afternoons where everything just felt possible. Mason was by the drink cooler, and he looked at me with this genuine smile that instantly made me forget all my play it cool rules. We talked for 3 hours straight, just sitting on the back porch steps, the party swirling around us. He truly listened when I talked about my work as a graphic designer. He asked thoughtful questions about my creative process, not like those guys who just pretend to listen until they can talk about themselves again. What really got me was how he paid attention. Our first real date? He remembered I took my coffee with just a splash of cream and no sugar. He surprised me with bookstore dates because I'd mentioned loving the smell of new books. He made me feel seen, truly seen, like he was interested in who I was, not who he wanted me to be. Our wedding happened 2 years later. Small, meaningful, in a garden with string lights and wildflowers. Only close friends and family, the kind of intimate ceremony where you recognize everyone and can actually have real conversations. I wore a simple ivory dress. Mason cried during his vows. My mom pulled me aside and said she'd never seen me happier. We settled into our 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. Kids rode bikes, neighbors knew each other's names. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, and Mason commuted downtown. We split bills, cooked together on weekends, laughed when our experiments went wrong. We talked about a house, maybe kids, definitely traveling. Life felt stable, predictable, comfortable, all the things I'd been taught to value. I thought I knew exactly who I'd married and what our future looked like. Looking back now, I realize I was living in a carefully constructed illusion, seeing only what Mason wanted me to see. The cracks started about 6 months into our marriage. Mason came home one evening, radiating excitement. He sat me down and told me his college best friend, Scarlett, was moving back to town. He described her with such nostalgic warmth, which at first seemed innocent. Scarlett was brilliant, he said, charismatic, a natural salesperson. his closest friend during their college years. I was genuinely happy for him. Everyone needs good friends, people who knew you before. I had my own college friends scattered around. I thought, great, this will be good for him. He'd been saying he felt disconnected from old friends. When I finally met Scarlett at a dinner Mason organized, she was exactly as he described, polished, confident, professionally dressed, even for a casual Friday. Her hair was highlighted, styled in loose waves, her jewelry understated but expensive. She had that practiced smile, warm but slightly impersonal, the kind that makes you feel welcomed but not truly seen. She was attractive, clearly someone who invested in her appearance as part of her professional brand. What struck me immediately was how easily Scarlett and Mason fell into an old rhythm. Within minutes, they were laughing about professors I'd never met, reminiscing about road trips I hadn't been on, finishing each other's sentences. I sat there, smiling and nodding, trying to participate, but mostly I felt like an observer at a reunion I wasn't part of. It wasn't hostile, just that their shared history created a language I didn't speak, inside jokes that needed explanations. Scarlett's husband, Elijah, was there too. A quiet accountant who seemed equally peripheral. He caught my eye at one point, while Mason and Scarlett were lost in a memory, and we shared this brief look. I didn't understand it then, but later, I'd recognize it as a mutual acknowledgement of our secondary status. The first small boundary violation happened so subtly, I almost didn't notice. Weeks after that dinner, Scarlett started texting Mason during our date nights. The first time, we were at the movie theater. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, typed a quick response, put it away. 5 minutes later, it buzzed again. Then again. By the time the movie started, Mason had exchanged a dozen messages with Scarlett about some work presentation she was nervous about. He apologized each time, promised to put the phone away, but it kept pulling his attention like a magnetic force. This pattern repeated over months. Dinner dates interrupted by texts about clients. Weekend mornings disrupted by phone calls about Scarlett's marriage problems with Elijah. Late evenings, Mason would be typing responses while we supposedly watched TV together. Each time I gently suggested maybe he could text her back later, he'd look at me with barely concealed disappointment, as if I was failing some fundamental test of understanding. Then came the spare key incident. Mason gave Scarlett a key to our apartment for emergencies without discussing it with me first. I found out when I walked out of my home office one Tuesday afternoon to find Scarlett sitting on our couch, shoes off, completely at home in my space, while Mason made her coffee. She cheerfully explained she needed to borrow our Wi-Fi for a client call because hers had gone down again, as if this was a recurring pattern I should have known about. I stood there in my own living room, feeling like an intruder, while Scarlett chatted with Mason about sales territories. When she finally left, an hour later, I asked Mason if we could establish some boundaries. Maybe Scarlett could text before coming over? His response was immediate and defensive. Scarlett's going through a difficult transition, he explained with exaggerated patience. New city, struggling marriage, high-pressure job. Real friends show up for each other without conditions. Are you really going to be the kind of person who puts convenience over compassion? That conversation became a template for dozens more. Every time I tried to set a boundary, Mason reframed it as me being unwelcoming, jealous, unable to handle his friendships. I started second-guessing myself. Was I possessive? Unreasonable? Maybe this was what mature adult friendships looked like, and I was just too insecure. Our 5th anniversary arrived. I'd made reservations 2 months in advance at an elegant downtown restaurant. I wore the emerald dress Mason had complimented years ago, the one he said made my eyes look like sea glass. I'd planned everything: dinner, a walk along the river walk where we'd had one of our first real conversations, then home, where a gift waited, a leather-bound photo album documenting our relationship. We made it halfway through appetizers before Mason's phone started buzzing incessantly. Once, twice, 5 times. Each notification fractured his attention a little more until his eyes were glued to the screen. I sat across from him, watching myself become invisible in real time. That's when I said those words, "Mason, it's our anniversary." And that's when he looked up with genuine confusion and said, "Scarlett's having a crisis." I'm just letting her know she's not alone. But I was alone. Sitting across from my husband on what should have been one of the most important nights of our year, while he provided emotional support to another woman. The irony was suffocating, bitter in my mouth, mixing with food I could barely swallow. That night, lying in bed while Mason slept peacefully beside me, I finally admitted what I'd been avoiding for months. My marriage had 3 people in it, and I was the least important one. 3 months passed after that anniversary dinner. 3 months of me trying to convince myself I was overreacting, that Mason's relationship with Scarlett was just an unusually close friendship, that my discomfort was my own issue. 3 months of swallowing my instincts, forcing smiles while Scarlett continued using her spare key to drop by unannounced, and Mason continued prioritizing her texts over our conversations. Then my laptop died. On a Wednesday morning in early December, right in the middle of a critical client project. The screen went black. Deadline was end of day. Panic. I needed access to my cloud files. Mason's laptop sat in his home office. He told me dozens of times, "Use it if you need to. We don't have secrets." So I grabbed it, powered it up, logged into my cloud storage. The presentation files loaded, and I dove back into work. About an hour in, I needed to reference our tax documents. Mason kept all our financial files on his laptop. I opened his file explorer, navigated to our shared documents. That's when I saw it. Buried among work files, in a way that suggested it was deliberately hidden, but not well enough. A folder labeled personal, private. Something about those 2 words together made my stomach clench. Mason and I didn't keep secrets. We operated on a foundation of openness. So why a private folder? My hands trembled. Part of me knew I should close the laptop, ask him later. Part of me hoped it was innocent, maybe surprise birthday planning. I clicked it open. Hundreds of files. Photos, screenshots, documents spanning back 3 years. My eyes tried to make sense of what I was seeing, my brain working to categorize before the emotional impact could hit. Mason and Scarlett, sitting across from each other at restaurant tables I didn't recognize, leaning in close, conversations that looked far more intimate than casual friendship. Candid shots of Scarlett, laughing, glowing with genuine joy. Selfies of the 2 of them, his arm around her, both smiling like they shared something precious and private. And then, screenshots. Dozens. Of text message conversations between them. I clicked the first screenshot. Timestamp, 2 a.m., 6 months ago. Scarlett had written a long paragraph about feeling lost in her marriage to Elijah, wondering if she'd made the right choices, missing the connection she used to feel with people who really understood her. Mason's response was equally long, validating every feeling, sharing his own thoughts about paths not taken and connections that transcend normal friendship boundaries. I opened another from a year ago. Late night again. Scarlett writing about how she couldn't sleep, thinking about different versions of her life. Mason responding with understanding, his own confessions about what-ifs, about regrets he couldn't fully articulate to most people. My client deadline was completely forgotten. I sat frozen at Mason's desk, clicking through screenshot after screenshot, watching a hidden relationship unfold in documented detail. These weren't casual check-ins. These were emotional confessions, intimate late-night conversations where 2 people shared their deepest feelings, regrets, and longings. Then I found the message that would replay in my mind for months. Burned into my memory with the precision of acid-etching glass. Scarlett sent it at 2:17 a.m., 8 months ago, right around the time Mason had started seeming distant at home. It read, "Sometimes I wonder what life would have been like if we'd gotten together instead of just staying friends back in college. Do you ever think about that?" Mason's response came just 3 minutes later, suggesting he'd been awake, waiting for her message, or thinking about her at 2 a.m. instead of sleeping next to his wife. He wrote, "More than I probably should, but we made our choices. Doesn't mean I don't value what we have now." I read those words 3 times, 4, 5 times, hoping they would rearrange themselves into something less devastating. Something innocent. But the meaning was crystal clear. My husband had feelings for Scarlett that went far beyond friendship. He'd been thinking about alternative versions of his life where they were together. And he valued what they currently had, whatever that was, enough to maintain it through years of secret communication. The worst part was the timestamp, 2:20 a.m. While I'd been sleeping in our bed, probably worried about some work project, Mason had been awake, engaging in emotional intimacy with another woman, discussing hypothetical romantic relationships they could have had together. I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper now. Pandora's box was open. I needed to see everything, no matter how much it hurt. I closed the screenshots and opened our joint credit card statements. Through the online banking portal Mason kept bookmarked. I started searching for patterns. Every Tuesday afternoon for the past 2 years, a charge appeared at Riverbend Cafe, an upscale bistro downtown that Mason had never once mentioned or suggested we visit. The amounts were consistently between $50 and $70, the kind of total for 2 people having a nice lunch with drinks. Far more than Mason would spend on a casual meal. I opened Mason's digital calendar. There it was, plain as day once I knew to look. Every Tuesday at noon, a recurring appointment simply labeled lunch meeting. No client names, no location. Just a vague tower block that had been on his calendar for years. I compared the dates of the Riverbend Cafe charges with the photos in his hidden folder. They matched perfectly. The photos of Mason and Scarlett at restaurant tables had been taken at those Tuesday lunches. While I'd been at home, working on freelance projects, eating leftovers at my desk, assuming my husband was grabbing a quick bite between meetings, he'd been having weekly secret lunch dates with Scarlett. Dates that required blocking off 2 full hours, involved significant money, and were important enough to maintain for years. This wasn't occasional friendly catch-ups. This was deliberate, sustained, carefully planned deception. Mason had been building a parallel emotional life with Scarlett, complete with standing dates, intimate late-night conversations, and shared secrets. All while coming home to me and acting like everything was normal. I sat at that desk for 2 hours straight. My client presentation completely abandoned, the deadline passed unnoticed. I read every screenshot, documented every suspicious charge, looked at every photo, studying their body language. The evidence wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't a few questionable texts that could be explained as friendship. This was years of documented emotional intimacy, financial proof of secret meetings, photographic evidence of a relationship that crossed every boundary a married person should respect. What made everything worse was the sudden clarity about how thoroughly I'd been manipulated. Every single time over the past months, when I'd expressed discomfort about Scarlett's constant presence, Mason had made me feel like the problem. He'd called me jealous, possessive, insecure, unable to handle mature adult friendships. He'd positioned himself as the patient, reasonable partner, trying to help his wife work through her unfounded suspicions. He'd made me question my own sanity until I started believing my discomfort was a personal failing. But my instincts had been screaming truth the entire time. Every uncomfortable feeling, every moment of suspicion, every time I'd felt like the third wheel in my own marriage. All of it had been an accurate perception of a reality Mason was actively hiding from me while gaslighting me into thinking I was imagining problems that didn't exist. I finally understood why he defended Scarlett so fiercely. Why he prioritized her texts. Why he gave her a spare key without asking me. Why he'd looked at me with disappointment when I suggested their friendship was unhealthy. Because in Mason's mind, I wasn't his priority. Scarlett was. I was the obligation, the legal wife, the person he came home to out of commitment rather than choice. Scarlett was the person he thought about at 2 a.m., the person he carved out special time for every week, the person he shared his deepest feelings with. I had become the third wheel in my own marriage, and the evidence proving it was spread across Mason's laptop screen in undeniable detail. I sat at Mason's desk, staring at the evidence of his betrayal, until the afternoon light shifted and shadows stretched across the room. My client deadline had passed hours ago. My phone had buzzed multiple times. None of it mattered anymore. Eventually, I forced myself to move. I found a USB drive and methodically copied everything. Every photo. Every screenshot of their late-night conversations. every credit card statement. I organized it all into folders with clear labels and dates, building a case like a lawyer preparing for trial. When I finished, I sat back. I expected tears, or rage, or the kind of emotional collapse you see in movies. Instead, I felt a strange, calm clarity. The kind that comes after shock wears off, and you realize you're standing in wreckage that can't be rebuilt. There was almost relief in it, knowing I hadn't been crazy. My instincts had been right. I looked at the clock, 3:45. Mason would be home around 6:30, like always, expecting dinner and a normal evening. I decided to give him exactly that. At least, at first. I wanted to see if he could sit across from me and pretend everything was fine, knowing what he'd been hiding. I went to the kitchen and started preparing dinner. Chicken with roasted vegetables, one of Mason's favorites. I set the table with our regular dishes. I even put on background music, creating an illusion of normalcy in our apartment that suddenly felt like a stage set. Mason walked through the door at 6:02, right on schedule. He looked tired. He smiled when he saw me, came over to kiss my cheek. "Something smells good," he said, heading to change. "Rough day with that client presentation?" My laptop had crashed this morning, a lifetime ago. He didn't know I'd spent the day discovering his emotional affair. "You could say that," I replied, my voice steady. I let him decompress for 15 minutes, long enough for him to change, pour himself a glass of wine, and settle onto the couch with his phone. I watched him scroll, probably texting Scarlett, completely oblivious. Then I walked over with his laptop, already open to that hidden folder. I sat down in the armchair across from him, the coffee table between us like a barrier. I turned the screen so he could see it clearly, and asked the simplest question I could formulate: "What is this?" Mason looked up from his phone, confusion crossing his face. Then recognition hit him. His eyes widened. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For 3 seconds, panic flashed across his features, raw and unguarded. Then it was gone, replaced by something harder. His expression shifted to defensiveness so quickly, I almost missed it. "You went through my private files?" His voice rose with indignation, as if I were the one who had committed an unforgivable violation. "Arya, what the hell? Those are my personal things. You had no right to go snooping through my laptop." The audacity of it stunned me. He wasn't denying what was in the folder. He wasn't apologizing. His first instinct was to make me the villain. "I was using your laptop because mine crashed during a work deadline," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I needed to access our tax documents, and I found a folder labeled private that contained evidence of a years-long emotional affair with Scarlett. So yes, I looked at it. And now I'm asking you to explain it." Mason set down his wine glass with force. "There's nothing to explain. You're misinterpreting a friendship because you've never been able to handle me being close with Scarlett. This is exactly the kind of jealous behavior I've been trying to be patient with for months." I felt something cold settle in my chest. He was actually going to try to gaslight me while the evidence sat between us on his laptop screen. "Mason," I said, my voice rising slightly. I read the text messages. "I saw the photos from your secret Tuesday lunch dates. I found the credit card charges at Riverbend Cafe every single week for 2 years. This isn't me misinterpreting friendship. This is you having an emotional affair and lying about it." "It's not an affair." He stood up, pacing, his voice taking on that exasperated tone he used when explaining something obvious. "Scarlett and I are close friends. We have been since college. Yes, we talk about deep things. Yes, we meet for lunch regularly. That's what real friendship looks like, Arya. Deep connection, emotional honesty, mutual support. Just because you don't have friendships like that doesn't mean they're inappropriate." Every sentence was a carefully constructed deflection, reframing his betrayal as my inadequacy. I'd heard these tactics before, but never so blatantly. Never, while hard evidence sat between us. "She texted you at 2 a.m., asking if you ever thought about what life would have been like if you'd gotten together instead of staying friends," I said, my voice harder now. "You responded that you thought about it, more than you probably should. That's not friendship, Mason. That's emotional infidelity. You're twisting things." He stopped pacing and turned to face me. "Taking private conversations out of context and building some narrative in your head because you're insecure about my friendships. Scarlett and I talk about hypothetical scenarios sometimes. That doesn't mean anything inappropriate is happening. The argument continued for 2 hours, circling the same points. Mason deflecting, reframing every piece of evidence. He had an explanation for everything. The late-night texts were just friends supporting each other. The secret lunch dates were regular catch-ups he didn't mention because he knew I'd react badly. The intimate conversations were normal for people with history. Every time I pointed out how he'd crossed boundaries, he countered that I was the one with the problem. Too jealous, too possessive, too insecure to trust. I was exhausted. My head hurt from the circular logic. But I kept pushing. I needed him to acknowledge the truth. To stop lying. To take responsibility. That's when Mason delivered the statement that would seal the fate of our marriage. He stood in the middle of our living room, arms crossed, jaw set. His voice took on that patronizing tone I'd come to recognize. If anything, Arya, you owe Scarlett an apology. The words hung in the air. I stared at him, genuinely shocked into silence. She has been nothing but kind to you over the years, Mason continued, warming to his argument. She's tried to include you, tried to be friendly, and you've treated her with suspicion and coldness. She knows you don't like her. She's told me it hurts her feelings how you act around her, how you always try to limit our friendship. He was actually doing this, making his emotional affair partner the victim and me the aggressor. You want me to apologize to her? My voice was oddly calm despite the rage building inside me. For what exactly? For noticing that my husband was having an emotional affair? For being uncomfortable with inappropriate boundaries? For trusting my instincts when you've spent months trying to convince me they were wrong? For being jealous and possessive and unable to handle me having close friendships? Mason's voice rose. For making Scarlett feel unwelcome and judged when she's done nothing wrong. She deserves an apology, and if you can't give her that, then I seriously need to reconsider this marriage. The room went absolutely silent. Even the background music seemed to fade. Mason stood there, arms crossed, expression set, believing he held all the power. He thought he was calling my bluff, forcing me to choose between my pride and my marriage. He had no idea what he'd just done. Something shifted inside me in that silence, cold, clear, absolutely certain. I looked at this man, demanding I apologize to his emotional affair partner for the crime of noticing their inappropriate relationship, and realized he'd just handed me the perfect weapon. If Mason wanted an apology, he would get one. Just not the kind he was expecting. I let the silence stretch. Then I spoke, my voice much calmer than I felt. Fine. Mason's expression shifted to surprise. He'd clearly expected more argument. I'll apologize to Scarlett, I continued, my tone completely reasonable. But let's do it properly. At her house. With Elijah there too. If I'm going to apologize for hurting her feelings, I want to do it right, in front of both of our spouses, so everyone can hear what I have to say. Mason's face lit up with relief, and something disturbingly like triumph. He actually smiled, believing he'd won, that he'd successfully broken me into compliance. Really? You'll do that? His voice was eager now, pleased with himself. Absolutely, I said. Schedule it for this Saturday evening. I want to make sure everyone's there. I'll prepare what I want to say. Mason nodded enthusiastically, already pulling out his phone to text Scarlett. I watched his face relax for the first time all evening, and felt nothing but cold clarity. He had no idea what I was actually planning. No comprehension that he just arranged the perfect stage for me to detonate the truth in front of everyone who needed to hear it. Mason spent the rest of that evening texting Scarlett, his face glowing with satisfaction. I watched him from across the room, this man who believed he'd just won some significant victory, and felt nothing but cold determination settling deeper into my bones. The next morning, Thursday, I woke up with absolute clarity. Mason left for work, kissing my forehead, reminding me to think about my apology. The moment his car pulled out, I returned to his laptop. I spent 3 hours methodically documenting everything. Detailed screenshots of every damaging conversation, organized chronologically, showing the clear progression. The early messages were friendly enough, but then they shifted, gradually, into something deeper, more intimate, crossing boundaries incrementally. By the second year, Scarlett was texting him late at night about feeling disconnected from Elijah, missing emotional intimacy. Mason responded with paragraphs validating her feelings, sharing his own struggles. They started using pet names, saying things like, "You always know exactly what I need to hear, and I don't know what I'd do without you." I organized it all into folders by year and month, creating a timeline impossible to dismiss. Then I compiled the financial evidence. Our joint credit card statements, highlighting every Tuesday lunch charge at Riverbend Cafe for 2 years. I calculated the total, over 7,000 SPENTONmealsWITHERWOMANWHILEWE DBEENSAVINGFORAHOUSEDOWNPAYMENT THENADIFFERENTWAY BURIDNMASONSEMEIPTSFORGIFTSHEDPURESIGNERSCARLET ADESIGNERSCARFFORHERBIRTHDAY 7,000. Spent on meals with another woman while we'd been saving for a house down payment. Then he found something that madam stomach turning a different way. Buried in Mason, C-mail inbox were receipts for gift she'd purchased for Scarlett. A designer's scarf for her birthday, $250, an expensive bottle of French wine for her promotion. $180. FLOWERDELIVERFCEFORAMAJORDEAL 180. Flowers delivered to Hirofisi for a major deal. 75. With a card that read, "Always knew you could do it. So proud of you." These weren't casual friend gestures. These were the kinds of gifts you bought for someone you were romantically involved with. The card messages crossed every professional and platonic boundary. I printed everything, created digital backups in 3 separate cloud storage accounts that Mason didn't have access to, and even saved copies to 2 different USB drives. I wasn't taking any chances. By Thursday afternoon, I had built an airtight case. But I had one more thing to do, something that required courage I wasn't sure I possessed. I needed to call Elijah Pierce. I sat at our kitchen table, staring at my phone for 10 minutes before pulling up his contact. Mason had it saved from all the times we'd coordinated double dates. I'd probably spoken to Elijah fewer than a dozen times. He was quiet, reserved. But I'd seen something in his eyes at those gatherings, especially recently. A kind of resigned awareness that suggested he knew more than he was saying. The same look I'd probably been wearing myself. My finger hovered over the call button. Part of me wondered if this was going too far. But another part of me, the part that had been gaslit and manipulated for months, knew Elijah deserved the courtesy of a warning. He deserved to know his world was about to change. I pressed call. He answered on the 3rd ring. "This is Elijah." "Hi, Elijah. It's Arya Montgomery, Mason's wife." A brief pause. "Arya, is everything okay? I'm calling because Mason has arranged for me to come to your house on Saturday evening to apologize to Scarlett. He insisted it happen in front of both of you, and I wanted to make sure you'd be home for it." Another, longer pause. I could almost hear him processing the layers of meaning beneath my words. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. More alert. Focused. "I'll be there. No questions. No confusion. Just immediate understanding." "Thank you," I said quietly. Then, because I needed him to understand, "I think there are some things you should know. Things that have been going on that you might have suspected, but didn't have proof of." The silence on the other end was heavy with recognition. Finally, Elijah spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for calling me. Those 5 words carried the weight of years of suspicion. You deserve to know the truth, I said. We both do. I'll be there Saturday, he repeated. And Arya, whatever you're planning to say, I'm ready to hear it. We hung up. I sat there, feeling the weight of what I'd just set in motion. Elijah knew something was coming. He'd be prepared. Mason came home that evening in an excellent mood. He'd apparently had lunch with Scarlett that day, their regular Tuesday shifting to Thursday. He talked enthusiastically about how grateful Scarlett was that I'd agreed to apologize, how much it would mean to her, how this would strengthen all of our relationships. I nodded and smiled, internally reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. Friday was more of the same. Mason coached me repeatedly on what to say. He'd even written bullet points on his phone, acknowledge my jealousy, admit I'd misinterpreted their friendship, thank Scarlett for her patience, express gratitude for another chance. He suggested I bring an expensive bottle of wine as a peace offering. Really show her you're serious about making amends, he'd said earnestly. I agreed to everything. I practiced the humble facial expressions he suggested. I asked clarifying questions about tone and body language, making him think I was genuinely preparing to deliver the apology he'd scripted. With each coaching session, Mason's confidence grew. His shoulders relaxed. He smiled more easily. He'd successfully trained his wife to perform a public submission that would cement his emotional affair partner's permanent priority. Friday evening, he actually hugged me and said he was proud of me. I hugged him back, feeling the unfamiliar weight of deliberate deception. I'd never been good at lying, but something had shifted inside me. I'd learned from the master. That night, I lay in bed next to Mason, listening to him breathe peacefully, completely unaware that tomorrow would detonate his carefully constructed world. Sleep wouldn't come. My mind circled through what I was planning. Was I becoming vindictive? Was public humiliation the answer? Or was I just hurt and lashing out? Did Elijah really deserve to have his marriage destroyed in front of witnesses? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Mason's face illuminated by his phone at our anniversary dinner. The disappointed looks he'd given me. The patient, patronizing tone. The way he'd made me question my sanity while maintaining a hidden emotional affair that proved I'd been right all along. I thought about all the women who stay silent because speaking truth makes others uncomfortable, who apologize for being right. And I realized what I was planning wasn't petty revenge. It was justice, clarity, and the kind of truth-telling that shatters comfortable lies people have been living in for too long. When dawn finally broke, painting the walls with pale gold light, I got up with absolute certainty. I wasn't nervous anymore. I was ready to deliver the apology Mason had demanded. Just not the one he'd scripted. Saturday had arrived. And by evening, everyone would finally know the truth. Saturday arrived. Clear skies, unseasonably warm. I spent the morning moving through our apartment like someone preparing for battle. Mason interpreted my quiet focus as nervousness about the apology. He kept reassuring me it would be fine, that Scarlett was looking forward to clearing the air, that this evening would be a new beginning for all of us. I let him believe whatever he needed to believe. By 5 p.m., I was dressed in a simple navy dress, respectful understated. Mason had picked out the expensive French wine that morning, wrapped it carefully, treating it like a peace offering. We left our apartment at 6:15 for the 25-minute drive. Mason insisted we take his car, arrive together, a united front. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other patting my knee. He talked the entire drive about how meaningful this was, how proud he was of me, how our marriage would be stronger. I watched suburban streets slide past, houses with lights, families walking dogs. None of them had any idea that in one of those similar-looking houses, 4 lives were about to detonate. Mason kept glancing at me, a hopeful expression mixed with barely concealed nervousness. He was looking for signs of rebellion. I gave him nothing. My expression remained neutral, maybe slightly anxious, like someone before an uncomfortable but necessary conversation. I held the wine bag. I nodded when he talked. I was the picture of a contrite wife, ready to make amends. When we pulled up to Scarlett and Elijah's house at 6:40, all the interior lights were blazing. I could see Scarlett arranging something on her coffee table. Even from the car, I could tell she'd gone to effort for this occasion, setting the stage for what she believed would be her validation and my public submission. Mason parked, turned off the engine, then turned to me. An expression of such genuine emotion, I almost felt sorry for him. "Thank you for doing this," he said quietly. "I know it's not easy, but this means everything to me, Arya. Everything. Our marriage is going to be so much stronger after tonight. You'll see." I looked at him, this man who had gaslit me for months, who had demanded I apologize to his affair partner, who truly believed this evening would strengthen our marriage by cementing another woman's permanent priority in his life. "I know it, Will," I said, and squeezed his hand back. That was the last moment Mason would look at me with trust or affection, though he didn't know it yet. We walked up to the front door, Mason carrying the wine. He rang the doorbell. Scarlett opened it, her smile wide, barely concealing her smugness. She looked perfect, of course. Designer jeans, silk blouse, flawlessly styled hair. She'd clearly dressed for this occasion, like someone expecting to be photographed for a lifestyle magazine. "Mason, Arya, come in." Her voice was warm, playing the gracious host. "I'm so glad we're doing this. Really, clearing the air will be good for all of us." Mason handed her the wine. Scarlett made appreciative noises, though she set it aside without much genuine interest. She was focused on me, studying my face, my body language, gauging how thoroughly Mason had broken me. Elijah appeared from the kitchen. The moment our eyes met, I saw everything I needed to know. He was alert, watchful, braced for impact. His expression had none of the resigned exhaustion I'd seen before. He knew something significant was about to happen. And unlike Mason and Scarlett, he was prepared for it to be uncomfortable. "Arya." "Mason." He nodded, his voice neutral. Then his eyes found mine again, for a fraction of a second, and I saw acknowledgement there. Recognition, maybe even gratitude. We all moved into their living room. Scarlett and Elijah settled onto their gray sectional, sitting close enough to appear united, but with enough space that suggested the distance in their marriage. Mason and I took matching armchairs across from them, a glass coffee table creating a barrier. The coffee table held wine glasses already poured, a carefully arranged cheese board. Scarlett had clearly staged the scene for receiving an apology that would validate years of boundary violations. The room felt theatrical under the bright lighting, like we were all actors given scripts, except only I knew the real plot. Mason settled into his chair and gave me an encouraging nod. His expression radiated barely contained excitement, mixed with relief. He thought he'd won. Scarlett folded her hands in her lap with gracious expectation, her posture perfect, her expression carefully arranged into magnanimous forgiveness. She was ready to receive my contrition. Elijah leaned back, arms crossed, watching with focused intensity. He was the only person in that room, besides me, who understood that something was about to shift. I took a deliberate breath, sat down my wine glass on the coffee table. The sound of glass meeting would seem unnaturally loud in the expectant silence. I looked directly at Scarlett, holding her gaze. I began speaking in a voice that was calm, measured, and gave nothing away. "Scarlett, I want to start by saying that Mason was absolutely right." I paused, letting those words settle. Her smile widened slightly. "I do owe you an apology." Another pause. Scarlett's posture relaxed fractionally. Mason's face lit up with relief and satisfaction. Elijah's expression didn't change at all, but his eyes sharpened. But not for the reasons you think. The atmosphere in that living room shifted so dramatically, I could almost feel the air pressure change. Mason's encouraging smile faltered and froze. Scarlett's expression transformed from gracious acceptance to cautious uncertainty. Elijah leaned forward slightly, his full attention locked on me, every muscle in his body alert. I continued in that same calm, measured voice, not raising my volume or changing my tone, just speaking truth with the kind of clarity that comes from absolute certainty. I apologize for staying silent when I should have spoken up years ago. I apologize for allowing you and Mason to continue an emotional affair right under my nose while convincing myself I was the crazy one for feeling uncomfortable. Mason tried to interrupt, his voice sharp with warning. Arya, what are you? I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence without even looking at him. My eyes stayed locked on Scarlett's face, watching her carefully constructed facade begin to crack. Let me finish. You demanded an apology. I'm giving you one. I turned my attention to Elijah, whose face had gone completely still. I pulled out my phone, with hands that were steady despite everything, opened the folder I'd so carefully organized, and began speaking in that same measured tone. I apologized to Elijah, actually, because he deserved to know the truth about his wife long before tonight. For the past 3 years, Mason and Scarlett have been meeting every Tuesday for secret lunch dates at Riverbend Cafe. They've been having late-night text conversations about alternative life choices they wish they'd made together, about intimate regrets and emotional connections that cross every boundary a married person should respect. I handed my phone directly to Elijah. I watched his face as he took it with trembling hands. His eyes moved across the screen, reading the first message, then scrolling to the next, then the next. The color drained from his face so completely, he looked like he might be sick. But his hands kept moving, kept scrolling, methodically reviewing every piece of evidence I'd compiled. Mason was on his feet now, his voice rising with panic. Elijah, don't listen to this. She's taking things completely out of context. You know how Arya gets about my friendship with Scarlett. She's always been jealous, and now she's trying to destroy. How long? Elijah's voice cut through Mason's explanation like a blade through paper. He didn't raise his volume. He didn't need to. The coldness in those 2 words silenced everything else in the room. He was still looking at my phone, still scrolling, but his question was directed at Scarlett with absolute precision. The room fell into a silence so complete, I could hear someone's watch ticking. Scarlett's mouth opened and closed several times. Her perfectly composed expression had cracked completely now, tears forming in her carefully made-up eyes. She tried the reflexive denial first, her voice shaking. It's not what it looks like. Mason and I are just close friends. We've always been close. There's nothing physical between us. Nothing inappropriate has actually happened. Elijah finally looked up from my phone, and the expression on his face made even me take a step back. It wasn't rage exactly, though that was there. It was something colder, more devastating. Recognition, vindication, years of suppressed suspicion finally given permission to surface. I didn't ask if you slept with him, Elijah said, his voice still controlled, but carrying an undercurrent of fury more frightening than shouting would have been. I asked how long you've been having an emotional affair with Mason while making me feel crazy for noticing. The parallel to my own experience was so perfect it felt orchestrated. We had both been living the same nightmare of gaslighting and manipulation, just from different angles. Both told we were paranoid or insecure. Both made to feel like the problem while our spouses maintained an inappropriate relationship right in front of us. Scarlett's carefully maintained facade shattered completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Elijah, please. You're misunderstanding. We never meant for anything to 3 years. Elijah's voice was flat. According to these messages, this has been going on for at least 3 years. 3 years of secret lunches. 3 years of late-night conversations about regretting your life choices. 3 years of you telling him things you never told me. He scrolled further, his jaw tightening. Here's one from 8 months ago, where Scarlett asks Mason if he ever thinks about what life would have been like if he'd gotten together instead of staying friends. And Mason responds that he thinks about it more than he probably should. Mason had found his voice again, but instead of apologizing, he went straight into damage control. He was standing now, his face flushed with anger and humiliation, pointing at me. Arya, you're destroying everything. This isn't what I meant when I asked you to apologize. You twisted what I asked you to do. You've taken private conversations completely out of context, and you're using them as weapons to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. His voice cracked with desperation. He turned to Elijah, palms up in a placating gesture. Look, Elijah, you have to understand. Scarlett and I have been close friends since college. We have history. Yes, maybe we talk more than typical friends. Maybe we're more emotionally connected than some people might think is appropriate. But nothing physical has ever happened between us. We've never crossed that line. Arya's jealousy has blown a close friendship completely out of proportion. But Elijah wasn't listening. He was still scrolling through my phone, reading message after message where Mason and Scarlett crossed boundaries that no amount of explanation could justify. His expression grew colder and more closed with each screen. "It says here you bought her a designer scarf for her birthday," Elijah said quietly, reading from the email receipts I'd included. $250. And expensive wine for her promotion. Flowers sent to her office. He looked up at Scarlett. "You told me those flowers were from a grateful client." Scarlett's tears were flowing freely now. "Elijah, I can explain how much money has Mason spent on you over the past 3 years. Elijah cut her off, while telling me we needed to be more careful with our budget. Mason's attempts to control the narrative were falling apart. The evidence spoke louder than his deflections. I stood up slowly, smoothing my navy dress, picking up my purse. Mason continued his desperate explanations to an audience that had stopped listening. The time had come for me to leave. To walk away from the explosion I detonated and let it burn through whatever was left. I looked at Mason directly, meeting his eyes for what would probably be the last time with any kind of intimacy. "You demanded I apologize for speaking truth. I just did. You told me to do it in front of Elijah. Done. You threatened me with divorce if I didn't comply. Well, Mason, consider this my answer to that threat." Then I turned to Elijah, whose expression was now a complex mix of painful gratitude and devastation. "I've sent you copies of everything to your email address. All the screenshots, all the financial records, all the evidence you need to make informed decisions about your marriage. You deserve to know the truth, and I'm genuinely sorry I didn't tell you sooner." Mason grabbed my arm as I moved toward the door. His grip was tight, his fingers digging into my skin with desperate strength. His voice shifted from angry to pleading. "You can't just walk out. We need to talk about this. Arya, please. You're my wife. We can work through this if you just calm down and be reasonable." I pulled my arm free with more force than I'd intended, leaving red marks where his fingers had been. I met his eyes one final time. "No, Mason. You need to talk to your lawyer, because I'm done being the understanding wife in a 3-person marriage where I was always the least important person." I walked toward the door without looking back. Behind me, I could hear Scarlett sobbing, her composure completely destroyed. I heard Elijah's cold questions continuing, his voice controlled but carrying that undercurrent of fury. I heard Mason's increasingly desperate attempts to explain, to justify, to salvage something. But none of it was my problem anymore. I stepped out into the cool October evening air and closed the door behind me, muffling the sounds of their imploding marriages. The suburban street was quiet, peaceful, completely at odds with the devastation I'd just left behind. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called for a rideshare. The driver arrived within 10 minutes. I climbed into the back seat and spent the entire 30-minute drive staring out the window. Houses with lights on, families inside. People living their normal Saturday evenings, completely unaware that in one similar-looking house, 4 lives had just detonated. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for the devastation I'd caused. I destroyed my own marriage, yes, but I'd also destroyed Scarlett and Elijah's. I'd humiliated Mason and Scarlett publicly. I'd handed Elijah information that would haunt him for years. But mostly, I felt relieved. Like I'd finally stopped carrying a weight I hadn't realized was crushing me for so long. When the rideshare dropped me off at our apartment building, I walked through the lobby and up to our floor feeling like I was moving through a different world. I unlocked our door and stepped inside. Immediately, the space felt different. Lighter somehow, less suffocating. Mason's things were everywhere, his jacket, his shoes, his laptop. But they all felt temporary now, like artifacts from a life that had already ended. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on our couch in the quiet apartment, and let myself feel the full weight of what came next. I sat there, nursing my wine. Part of me wondered if Mason would come home at all that night. But some deeper instinct told me he'd come back, if only to try one more time to control the narrative. His key turned in the lock at 1:47 a.m. I'd been watching the clock, existing in that strange suspended state between exhaustion and hyper-awareness. The door opened, and the man who entered our apartment looked nothing like the confident husband who'd left it just 5 hours earlier. His face was ravaged, eyes red and swollen from what must have been crying. His hair stood up in places. His shirt was wrinkled. He looked like someone who'd aged a decade in an evening. He stood in the doorway, staring at me. Then he closed the door with careful control and walked into the living room. The look on his face was something I'd never seen before, equal parts devastation and fury, grief and rage, all competing for dominance. How could you do that? His voice came out raw, scraped clean of its usual confident tone. How could you humiliate me like that? Destroy my friendship? Share private conversations that you had no right to see in the first place? I took another sip of wine and said nothing. I'd said everything that needed saying at Scarlett's house. Now it was Mason's turn to deal with the consequences. He started pacing, jerky and agitated. You violated my privacy. You went through my personal files, read my private messages, and then you weaponized them to hurt people who've done nothing wrong. Do you understand what you've done? You've destroyed 2 marriages because you couldn't handle me having a close friendship. This was the anger phase. Deny, deflect, attack. Make the person who discovered the betrayal into the villain. I let him pace and rant for 20 minutes, cycling through accusations about my jealousy and insecurity. Then he shifted strategies, sitting down across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Vulnerability. Remorse. Look, I know I made mistakes, he said, his voice softer. Maybe Scarlett and I got too close. Maybe I didn't set appropriate boundaries. But we can work through this, Arya. We can go to couples therapy. I'll put distance between myself and Scarlett. Whatever you need. Our marriage is worth fighting for. This was the bargaining phase. Promising change, offering concessions. I set down my wine glass and looked at him directly. Mason, I'm filing for divorce. His face went through another rapid evolution. Shock first, then calculation, then manipulation. His features arranged themselves into wounded confusion. You're overreacting, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I knew so well. You're emotional right now, understandably, but destroying our marriage over a friendship that you misinterpreted isn't the answer. You're letting your insecurities ruin something good. This is exactly what I was trying to help you work through. Even now, even caught with irrefutable evidence of his emotional affair, Mason was trying to make this my failing. My insecurity. My misinterpretation. I stood up and walked to our bedroom without another word, closing and locking the door behind me. I heard Mason call after me. Heard him try the door handle. Heard him pace for another hour. Around 2 a.m., I heard him finally settle on the couch, probably too exhausted to keep performing. The next morning, he tried yet another approach, the wounded husband who just wanted to save his marriage. He called in sick, spent the entire day following me around, trying to initiate conversations about rebuilding trust. I was done. Done fighting, done explaining, done accepting blame for other people's betrayals. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after I detonated our lives at Scarlett's house, I called Victoria Brennan. I'd gotten her name from a colleague who spoke highly of her strategic approach to difficult divorces. Victoria had a reputation for being thorough, uncompromising, and completely unsympathetic to spouses who tried to manipulate. Her office was downtown, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victoria herself was in her mid-50s, professionally dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a direct manner I found immediately reassuring. Our first consultation lasted 2 hours. I showed her everything. The screenshots, the credit card statements, the photos, the gift receipts. Victoria reviewed each piece of evidence, occasionally making notes, asking clarifying questions. When she finished, she sat back. Emotional affairs are harder to prove than physical ones in divorce proceedings, she said with straightforward honesty, but the documentation you've compiled is exceptionally comprehensive. This shows a clear pattern of deception spanning years, financial evidence of resources being diverted outside the marriage, and communication that crosses appropriate boundaries. We can absolutely use this. She laid out her recommended strategy. File for divorce on grounds of marital misconduct based on emotional infidelity. push for a favorable settlement given Mason's documented pattern of deception and the emotional harm it had caused. "He'll try to make you the villain," Victoria said. "He'll claim you're jealous, vindictive, unable to handle his friendships. He'll try to reframe his emotional affair as innocent closeness. Don't let him. The evidence speaks for itself." I hired her on the spot. 2 weeks later, I received an email that surprised me. The sender was Elijah Pierce. The subject line, "Thank you." I opened it with curiosity. The message explained that Elijah had filed for divorce the Monday after our confrontation. Armed with the evidence I'd provided, he wrote about years of suspecting something was wrong, but convincing himself he was paranoid, that Scarlett's friendship was innocent, even when his gut screamed otherwise. My apology had given him both validation and proof. He asked if we could meet for coffee sometime, carefully clarifying that it wasn't romantic. He just wanted to talk with someone who understood exactly what it felt like to be the third priority in your own marriage, to be gaslit. I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. Elijah looked different than I'd ever seen him. The resigned exhaustion was gone, replaced by something more solid and present. He looked like someone who'd finally stopped carrying a weight. Our conversation flowed easily. No need for pretense. We'd both already seen each other at our worst. Both publicly humiliated. Both discovered our instincts had been right. Elijah told me about years of watching Scarlett's face light up when Mason called, of being told he was too sensitive, too jealous. It was like listening to my own experiences reflected back. We'd been living parallel nightmares. Through mutual friends and social media, I learned that Mason and Scarlett tried to make a real relationship work after both divorces were set in motion. The predictability of it was almost funny. Once their connection was no longer forbidden or secret, once they had to deal with actual relationship logistics instead of stolen emotional moments, the fantasy collapsed under the weight of mundane reality. They lasted exactly 4 months. Scarlett struggled with Mason's financial situation after the divorce. Mason discovered that Scarlett's constant need for attention and validation, which had seemed endearing from a distance, became exhausting when it was his full-time responsibility. The relationship that had seemed so special and deep through text messages and secret lunches turned out to be mostly illusion. They broke up quietly, without drama. Just a sad fizzle that proved what I'd suspected all along. What they had wasn't love. It was the thrill of emotional affairs and the validation of being someone's secret priority. The knowledge that Mason and Scarlett's relationship had imploded gave me a strange sense of closure. Not satisfaction, exactly, though there was an element of vindication. More like confirmation that my instincts had been correct. What they'd had couldn't survive exposure to ordinary reality. 6 months after that explosive Saturday night, I sat in Victoria's office, signing the final divorce papers. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows. Victoria had negotiated a settlement more favorable than I'd expected. Mason agreed to split our savings, let me keep the apartment, even pay half my legal fees. Victoria suspected his generosity stemmed from wanting to end proceedings quickly, before more details of his relationship with Scarlett became public record. His colleagues and family were already asking uncomfortable questions. I signed my name on page after page, watching my signature legally transform me back into just Arya Montgomery. Each signature felt like closing a door that had been wedged open by Mason's attempts at reconciliation. When I signed the last page, Victoria smiled and extended her hand. "Congratulations, you're officially divorced." I expected this moment to feel heavier, sadder. Some echo of grief. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. Like I'd finally removed a heavy winter coat I'd been wearing for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to move freely. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, warmer on my skin, carrying the kind of promise that comes with genuine new beginnings. My weekly coffee meetings with Elijah had continued throughout the divorce. What started as mutual support between two people who'd survived similar betrayals gradually evolved into something more complicated. We met every Wednesday afternoon. At first, our conversations centered on processing the trauma. We compared notes on gaslighting tactics, traded stories about red flags, found comfort in being understood by someone who'd lived through the same nightmare. But around the third month, I noticed our conversations shifting. Less about past pain, more about present lives and future possibilities. Elijah mentioned a promotion. I talked about a freelance client who gave me creative freedom. We discovered shared interests, old black and white films, hiking trails that were difficult to find but rewarded you with solitude. Quiet mornings where silence felt comfortable. One Wednesday afternoon, Elijah suggested we meet for dinner instead of coffee. Something about the way he asked made it clear this was a different kind of invitation. "There's a new Italian place downtown," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice that I found endearing. "I thought maybe we could try it together, if you're interested." I looked at this quiet man who'd survived the same betrayal. We were both gun-shy, both carrying damage. But we'd built something honest between us over these months. A foundation based on truth instead of illusion. "I'd like that," I said. We took things slowly, both aware that trust rebuilds gradually after being thoroughly demolished. But the foundation felt different this time. Solid in ways my marriage to Mason never had been. I ran into Mason unexpectedly about 8 months after our divorce was finalized. I was in the grocery store produce section, reaching for apples, when another hand reached for the same bag. We both pulled back, started to apologize, then recognized each other. Mason looked different, older, more worn. New lines around his eyes, the kind that come from stress. His hair had more gray. He'd lost weight. We stood there awkwardly. "Arya," he said finally. "How are you?" I kept my answers simple. "I'm good. Working on some interesting design projects, enjoying the apartment, building a life that feels right." Mason nodded. "I'm glad you're doing well." He looked like he wanted to say something more. Finally, quietly, I made mistakes. A lot of them. I handled our marriage poorly. "I wish I'd listened when you tried to tell me the truth about my relationship with Scarlett." The apology was real. I could hear that. But it came far too late. Some things can't be unsaid. Some damage can't be undone. I appreciated the acknowledgement, but felt nothing beyond that. No anger anymore, no hurt. Just recognition that this was a person I used to know who taught me important lessons about boundaries and self-trust. "I appreciate you saying that," I replied. Then I asked, because some part of me was curious, "How's Scarlett?" Mason's expression closed off immediately. His face shut down. "We broke up months ago. Turns out what we had didn't translate well into an actual relationship. Once it wasn't secret anymore." He laughed without humor. "I'm living in a studio apartment across town, working through my own process of figuring out who I am outside the fantasy I'd been maintaining." We parted cordially, both of us aware that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. They can only be acknowledged as part of the landscape that shaped us. Today, I live in an apartment that no longer carries any trace of Mason or our marriage. I redecorated completely, erasing visual reminders, replacing them with choices that reflect only my taste. The bookshelves hold novels I actually want to read. The walls feature artwork that speaks to me. The furniture is arranged for my comfort. The silence here isn't lonely. It's peaceful. The sound of a life reclaimed. Of boundaries respected. Of truth spoken without apology. Elijah and I are still taking things slow. Still rebuilding trust. But what we're building feels different this time. Honest instead of performed. Based on respect instead of manipulation. Built between two people who understand the value of truth because we both paid the price for living in lies. I think about that night sometimes, that explosive apology that detonated multiple lives in Scarlett's carefully staged living room. Part of me still wonders if I could have handled it differently, more privately, with less public devastation. But mostly, I understand that some truths need to be spoken loudly. They need to be witnessed by everyone who's been affected by the lies. Mason wanted me to kneel and apologize for hurting Scarlett's feelings. I gave him exactly what he demanded. I just made sure the apology revealed every uncomfortable truth he'd been working so hard to hide. The moral crystallized clearly over these months of rebuilding. Never force an apology from a woman who speaks truth. Because women like me don't apologize for seeing clearly. We apologize for staying silent too long. And when we finally speak, we burn down every carefully constructed lie. Mason learned too late that forcing someone to apologize is only a victory if you control what they're apologizing for. I didn't bow. I weaponized truth. And in doing so, I reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is refuse to pretend anymore. The silence I live in now isn't the silence of submission. It's the silence of peace that comes after you finally stop carrying other people's lies and start living in the clear, bright light of your own truth. If this story of calculated truth and powerful comeuppance had you completely captivated, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when I delivered that apology and watched their faces crumble. What was your favorite moment? Have you ever had a moment where you just couldn't stay silent anymore? Tell me what you think. I really want to know. Thanks for watching. Take care.